Before I begin the message about the deliverances I gave to Mary, I ask that you subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss any teachings that I will share with you through this channel. I am Jesus Christ, your Savior, your Shepherd, and the one who holds the number of your days in my hands. Before Mary was formed in her mother's womb, I knew her. I designed her journey with care, and I walked with her every step, through joy, through sorrow, and through every shadow that tried to take her life before my time. Before I begin, I ask that you subscribe to this channel. Only then will I be able to receive your requests for deliverance in the comments to keep you in my arms. Let's begin. Mary lived in the quiet countryside of Ohio, but her life was anything but ordinary. Though she faced dangers, storms, sickness, and fear, I preserved her. Time and time again, death came close, but I said, not yet, because no one leaves this earth a second before or after the moment I have written. This is the story of the deliverances I gave to Mary, not because she was perfect, but because she was mine. And I, the resurrection and the life, guarded her until the day I called her home, at 117 years old, exactly when I had ordained. Let me show you how I loved her. When Mary was only 3 years old, her world was full of wonder, of wide-eyed curiosity, and unsteady footsteps. The Ohio sun stretched golden over the fields, and she would often wander just beyond the porch while her mother hung linens and her father worked the land. She had no sense yet of danger, only of butterflies and soft grass and the songs of birds in the trees. That morning, she toddled down the narrow path that led behind the house, a path she was always told not to follow alone. But the scent of wildflowers and the sound of water calling from the river beyond the woods whispered louder than the memory of her mother's warnings. She wandered deeper into the trees, her little hands brushing leaves, her shoes damp with dew, until she reached the edge of the riverbank. The current was fast that day, swollen from the rains the night before, but to Mary it looked like something to touch. She stepped closer, too close. One foot slipped on the mossy rock, and in an instant she tumbled forward, her small body swallowed by the cold rush of the river. No one saw, no one heard, no human eye was there to witness. But I saw. I always saw. The current wrapped around her, pulled her under, and fear flooded her lungs more than water did. She couldn't swim, couldn't scream. The surface grew distant, and the light above her flickered like a fading dream. In that sacred moment, as the breath left her lips and her body began to drift, I reached into the laws of creation and altered the rhythm of time. Just enough, just long enough. I stirred the heart of a creature nearby, a neighbor's old retriever resting beneath a tree some distance away. I sent a wind to carry her cries through the trees and into the ears of that dog, and in turn into the ears of a father who thought she was just playing in the yard. He ran. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, crashing through the underbrush as if led by instinct, though it was my hand that guided him. And just as Mary's tiny frame surfaced, limp and pale, her father dove in, heart pounding, tears already forming. He pulled her out and cried her name, again and again, the sound cracking like thunder through the forest. But she did not answer. Not yet. Not until I whispered into her soul and sparked her lungs back into motion. Her body shook. Her breath returned with a gasp that startled even the angels watching. I held her spirit on the edge of eternity for a moment, but only a moment, because her story was far from over. She coughed out the water and clung to her father's shirt, still not understanding what had happened, only that she had gone away and somehow come back. He held her close, speaking prayers he didn't know he remembered, and I heard every word. Back at the house, her mother wept when she saw them return, soaked and muddy but alive. She didn't ask many questions, just kissed her daughter's cheeks again and again, thanking a God she hadn't thought of in years. I welcomed her gratitude, though I wanted more than thanks. I longed for her heart, and I would wait, just as I waited for Mary to grow into the fullness of her purpose. From that day forward, the river never looked the same to them. They would often walk near it in the years ahead, holding hands and pointing out the place where the miracle happened. But no one truly knew the depth of what I had done that day. They spoke of luck, or fate, or maybe angels. But I was the one who held her when the waters tried to claim her. I was the one who said, "Not today." Mary would grow older, face other storms, and encounter even darker valleys. But the river was her beginning, not of life, but of awareness. Of knowing, deep in the spirit, that something greater had reached into her story, something or someone who had not let her die when death had already opened its mouth. And even though she could not recall the exact moment of drowning, or the brightness that hovered in the edges of her vision as she passed between two worlds, her soul remembered. It always would. And I, who walked beside her every day since, never forgot, because I was the one who saved her, and I would do it again. When Mary was 9 years old, the world felt like an endless field of possibilities, literally. The corn stretched high around her home that summer, taller than she was, tall enough to become a playground of secret paths and whispered adventures with neighborhood children. That day, the sky had been a brilliant blue in the morning, but by afternoon it began to churn with a deeper color, gray-green, thick with the smell of rain and electricity. The grown-ups were too distracted with chores and conversations to notice what the sky was saying, but I heard it clearly. A storm was coming, not just of clouds, but of danger. Mary, barefoot and laughing, darted between rows of corn, unaware of the clouds forming overhead. She had no fear. Her childlike heart trusted the sun to return and the ground to remain steady. But even as she played, I was watching. I saw the storm form miles away, saw the bolt of lightning that split from the heavens and made its way down toward the earth like a finger of fire. I knew where it was going. I knew how close it would come. She had just crouched down between stalks, her hand on the metal handle of an old garden hoe, abandoned weeks before. She liked to imagine it was a sword or a treasure. And in her imagination, she didn't notice how still the air had become. Not a leaf stirred, not a single insect buzzed. Even the birds had gone silent. I felt time narrow to a needle's point. The lightning left the sky at the speed of thought, and it was aimed directly at the ground near her. In one breath, I stood between her and that bolt. I didn't stop the lightning. No, I let it come. But I curved its fury away from her body. It struck the handle of the tool with a force that shook the ground and sent sparks flying like angry bees. Mary screamed and fell back, the noise ringing in her ears, her hands tingling with the charge that had passed so near her skin. But she was alive, not singed, not burned, just shaken, terrified, and very much still mine. The other children came running when they heard the sound. Her brother was the first to reach her, shouting her name. She couldn't speak right away. Her voice trembled inside her like a bell still echoing from the shock. Her small body trembled too, but her heart beat strong, protected by my unseen shield. Adults gathered quickly, drawn by the unmistakable smell of ozone and fear. They found the scorched tool, the blackened grass, the mark in the soil where fire had touched down. But Mary, she was untouched. I watched as her father knelt beside her, checking her hands, her arms, her face. He didn't understand how she had survived, and he never would. Not fully. But I saw the way he looked up toward the sky afterward, as if someone had spared him what he could not bear to lose. I met his gaze from heaven, though he didn't know who he was thanking. Still, I received his silent praise. Mary didn't sleep much that night. She kept turning the event over in her mind, replaying the flash, the sound, the sensation that she couldn't describe, like a breath of heat that had missed her by an inch. I stayed by her bed, whispering peace to her thoughts. She didn't know my voice yet, but her soul heard me, and I calmed her until her eyes finally closed. In the days that followed, she avoided the cornfield, but she also began to ask questions about me. Quiet ones, gentle ones. Questions children often ask when they sense there's more to this world than what they see. I was patient. I knew she was beginning to understand that someone had watched over her. And she was right. I had been there in the moment the heavens reached down to strike the earth. I had placed my hand between destruction and her small life, and I would not let go, because Mary still had many years ahead of her, and I had already counted every one. When Mary was 16, her world had begun to change. Childhood was fading behind her, like the mist on early mornings in Ohio, and the ache of becoming something more, something older, was beginning to shape her heart. She had learned to drive that year, with hands that still trembled slightly on the wheel, her mind full of dreams and worries that came with youth. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind where the sun feels heavier than usual, and the air buzzes with the restlessness of a school week ending. Mary walked home that day, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her thoughts lost in a swirl of plans and questions about the future. She approached the crosswalk near the small-town intersection just a few blocks from home. She'd crossed it 100 times before, always careful, always pausing to look both ways. But that day, her mind was somewhere else. She didn't notice the truck barreling down the road from the left, its driver distracted by his ringing phone, his foot slow to press the brake. The light had already turned red. He didn't see her, but I did. Time does not bind me. I see it all at once, the before, the after, the in-between, and in that moment I saw Mary take her first step off the curb just as death rushed toward her on 16 wheels. I didn't speak loudly, I didn't shout. I simply whispered her name, not into her ears, but into her spirit, and like wind catching the edge of a sail, she hesitated. Her foot stopped mid-air. Her heart skipped. She froze. The truck passed by her like a scream, the force of its wake tugging at her clothes and blowing her hair across her face. The driver slammed the brakes only after it was too late. If she had moved one step further, it would have been too late for her too. He didn't see her, not really, not until she stood there, trembling, breathless, just outside the grasp of disaster. He looked back through his side mirror, confused, shaken, and drove on, unaware of how close he had come to a tragedy that never made the news. Mary stood there for a long moment, stunned by what had just happened, her heart pounding against her ribs like a desperate knock. She didn't cry, not then, but I felt the wave of confusion and fear wash over her like a storm, and I wrapped her in my peace, invisible but near. She looked up at the sky with a question she didn't know how to ask. Why wasn't I hit? And though she couldn't hear my answer with her ears, her soul understood. Because I am not finished with you yet. She walked the rest of the way home in silence. No music in her ears, no smile on her lips, just the lingering sense that someone had stood between her and the worst. That night, she told no one what had happened, not because she didn't care, but because some moments are too deep for words. But I was with her, and I remembered every detail. I remember how she curled up in bed and whispered into the dark, "That was close." And I whispered back, "Yes, but I was closer." There are moments in your life when you will never understand why you were spared, when others were not. Mary would face that question many times in the years ahead, but I don't save people because they earn it. I save them because they are mine, and because their purpose has not yet unfolded. Her life at 16 was still a seed, and I had plans for that seed to bloom. In the weeks that followed, Mary began to walk a little slower, to pause a little longer at intersections. Not just the ones made of traffic and lights, but the ones in her soul too. She started to pray in quiet, uncertain ways. I heard them all. She didn't yet know how to find me in the pages of Scripture, but she found me in the stillness, in the memory of how something had stopped her before she stepped into death. She would tell someone the story years later, casually, almost like a forgotten anecdote, but even then her voice would slow when she reached the part about her foot freezing in place, and her eyes would drift off, as if watching it happen all over again. And I would smile, because I had been there then, and I was there again in that memory, always close, always watching. Because Mary's story was still being written, and no truck, no driver, no accident was strong enough to interrupt the chapters I had already planned. Mary was 24 when she became a mother. Her heart, already tender, grew even softer the day she held her newborn for the first time. She had always loved deeply, but motherhood awakened a fierceness in her, a quiet flame of courage that would burn brighter than she knew. Life on the farm was not easy, but it was full of beauty. Morning light spilling over the hills, the smell of hay, the laughter of her child wrapped in warm blankets, all of it sacred in its simplicity. But even in peace, danger waits without warning. And that morning, danger came with smoke. The fire started in the barn just after dawn. No one saw the spark. No one heard the first crackle of flames climbing the dry wood. Mary had stepped inside for only a moment, carrying her baby in her arms, humming softly as she searched for something she had left behind the night before. Outside, the wind picked up. It slipped through a broken window pane and breathed life into the smallest ember lying hidden in a corner of straw. In an instant, the flame grew, unseen, until it wasn't. By the time Mary turned toward the door, the fire had already wrapped itself around the edges of the barn, devouring the dry beams with hunger. Smoke poured in from above, and the only path out was already shrinking. She coughed, eyes burning, arms wrapped tight around her baby's body. Fear rose in her chest like a wave, but I was there. Even in the smoke, even in the heat, I was with her. She could not see more than a few feet ahead. The door seemed to vanish in the dark haze. But I guided her feet one at a time. She stumbled once, her hand grazing a beam that moments later would collapse into ash. The baby cried out, and her heart broke at the sound, but I steadied her, whispered strength into her soul. I did not lift her out with angels or part the fire with wind. I let her walk through it, with me. The flames closed in behind her, roaring louder than her heartbeat. She held her breath, closed her eyes, and ran. I was in every breath she took. I kept the fire from touching her child. I held back the roof from falling until her foot crossed the threshold. And when the fresh morning air hit her face again, she fell to her knees, clutching her baby close, weeping, not just from smoke, but from something deeper, something eternal. Her husband came running, shouting her name. He had seen the smoke from the pasture and dropped everything to get to her. He found her in the grass, ash on her face, tears on her cheeks, but alive. Very much alive. The barn behind her crackled and moaned as it collapsed into flame. Not everything was saved that day, but Mary and her child were. And that was everything to me. Later, they would say it was a miracle she got out. That the fire had been too fast, the wood too dry, the baby too small. They were right, it was a miracle, but not the kind that people imagine. I did not stop the fire. I simply refused to let it take her, because her story was still unfolding. Because I loved her too much to let that chapter end in smoke. That night, Mary could not sleep. The baby rested peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to being lost. But Mary sat by the crib in silence, listening to the wind against the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she remembered the sound of burning wood. And yet, beneath the fear, a strange calm rested on her. She could not explain it. She would never forget it. She began to wonder about me in a different way after that day, not as a distant god in stained glass windows, but as someone who walked with her through the fire, someone real, someone near. Her soul was beginning to awaken to the truth that I had always known. She was never alone, and so I watched her breathe in the cool air of that night, holding her child close, unaware that her journey had just entered a deeper kind of faith. Because this deliverance was not just about survival, it was about transformation. And Mary's heart, scorched but still beating strong, was becoming more like mine. Mary was 32 when the word cancer first slipped into her life like a thief in the night. It came suddenly, without invitation, in a doctor's office that smelled of disinfectant and quiet dread. She had gone in for routine tests, not expecting anything more than the usual. But then came the furrowed brow, the long pause, the doctor's eyes unable to meet hers. The scan showed a mass. The bloodwork was concerning. The words landed heavily, shaking the ground beneath her. Aggressive, they said. Stage 3, they added. Her world began to unravel before she could form a question. I was in the room before she entered. I saw the storm before she felt the first drop. I watched her knees go weak as she clutched the edge of the cold chair, trying to process what her ears were hearing. Her heart raced, her breath came shallow, and she stared out the window as if looking for me, though she didn't know it yet. I drew close, closer than her own breath, and I whispered to her soul, "You will not die. Not yet." Mary didn't tell many people at first. She carried the weight in silence, not out of pride, but out of protection, for her children, for her husband, for the fragile hope that still flickered somewhere inside her. She spent long nights alone in the kitchen, staring into the glow of the refrigerator light, asking me questions with tears in her eyes. Why now? What will happen to them? Are you really there? I heard every word. I caught every tear, and I was already moving. The plan was made quickly. Surgery was scheduled. Chemotherapy was discussed. The timeline was urgent, but as the hospital wheels began to turn, I was stirring a heart across the hall. One nurse, quiet and often overlooked, whose spirit I had been nudging gently for days. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The data, the tone, the pace, it all felt off to her. She didn't know why she felt prompted to recheck the report, to dig deeper, to run the tests again. But I knew. Because I placed that prompting in her. She moved carefully, respectfully, without causing alarm, and what she found changed everything. A mistake. One small digit in the lab's report had been recorded incorrectly. What had looked like an aggressive cancer wasn't cancer at all. It was a benign mass, treatable with rest and minor intervention, not fatal, not life-ending, not the shadow it had first appeared to be. I smiled as she brought the news to the doctor. I watched as he blinked in disbelief, rereading the new results, shaking his head in stunned relief. They called Mary back into the office. This time, the tone was different, hopeful, even embarrassed. There was a mistake, they said. You're going to be okay, they said. She stared at them, not understanding at first. Her body remained still, but her spirit began to weep. She was too overwhelmed to speak, but I heard the quiet thank you that echoed through her heart like a song. That moment of release, of fear leaving her body like smoke through an open window, was sacred. I was there, holding her heart steady. She stepped out of the building into the sunlight, blinking as if the world had changed. And in a way, it had. Not because she had been healed from sickness, but because she had been spared from fear, because death had knocked, and I had not opened the door. She walked slowly, breathing deeper than she had in days, knowing something had happened beyond what the papers could explain, something divine. That night, she told her husband everything. They sat at the kitchen table for hours, hands entwined, their children asleep upstairs. She spoke of the dread, the confusion, and then, of the grace. He cried quietly when she told him. And in the silence that followed, they both looked upward, no longer questioning if I was real, but realizing I had been near the whole time. Mary never forgot that misdiagnosis. She didn't bury it or pretend it had never happened. Instead, she carried it like a stone of remembrance, a marker in her life that said, "He saved me here." And over time, she began to speak of me more freely, more boldly. She knew now that I did not always part seas or send fire from the sky. Sometimes I speak through the gentle insistence of a nurse or the timing of a rechecked number, but in every detail, my love remains fierce. Because Mary's story was not meant to end in a hospital room. Not then, not there. Her breath still had purpose. Her hands still had work. And I, the author of life, was not done writing. When Mary was 47, the world around her had grown quieter. Her children were older now, and the home she once filled with lullabies and laughter had settled into rhythms of grown-up conversations and silent dinners. But in the stillness of those years, her prayers grew louder. She had begun to know me, not just as the one who had saved her in the past, but as the one who sat with her in the present. She often whispered my name while folding laundry or stirring soup. She didn't ask for much, just protection for her family and strength for the quiet battles no one else could see. That night, her prayers became a shield. It was long past midnight when it happened. Her husband had fallen asleep on the couch, and the rest of the house was dark and still. Mary had just drifted off when I stirred her spirit. She sat up suddenly in bed, unsure why. Her heart pounded, not from a dream, but from something deeper, something real. She listened, holding her breath, and that's when she heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard downstairs. Not the wind, not the house settling, a footstep. I was already at the door before the intruder ever touched the handle. He was a broken man, desperate, with shaking hands and a weapon hidden beneath his coat. He did not come for blood, only for money, for something to dull the pain in his soul. But sin has no boundaries, and death was close behind him. What he didn't know was that Mary's house had been prayed over. Her walls were watched by angels, and I myself had drawn a line he could not cross. He stepped through the kitchen toward the stairs, his breath unsteady. But I confused his senses. I made the shadows swirl in his eyes, the silence echo in his ears like voices. I stirred the weight of conviction in his chest so fiercely that he nearly stumbled. As he reached the bottom step, his hand brushed the banister, and he dropped the weapon. It clattered onto the floor like thunder in the quiet. He froze, and I whispered one word into his heart, "Leave." He turned. He didn't understand why. His feet moved before his mind could catch up. He walked out the door he had broken open, ran across the yard, and disappeared into the darkness. He would never return, and I would not stop pursuing him either, because mercy does not end at a locked door. But that night, the danger passed without a sound. Upstairs, Mary clutched the sheets, still wide-eyed, still listening. She didn't know yet what I had done, only that she felt a weight lift from the room. Peace settled over her once more. She lay back slowly, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, whispering my name again, not even knowing why, only that she needed me near. And I was, closer than ever. The next morning, they found the marks near the back door, and the weapon on the floor below the stairs. Her husband called the police. Neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. If he had gone any further, they said, "You don't know how lucky you are." But Mary didn't believe in luck. She knew, somewhere deep in her soul, she knew it was me. I had kept her. I had stood in the space between danger and her family once again. She lit a candle that night, not for fear, but for gratitude. Her home had always been modest, but that evening it became a sanctuary. She walked through every room and whispered prayers again, but this time not asking for help, but giving thanks. She knew now that even when her eyes were closed, my eyes never were. That her home was not just wood and nails, it was covered by my promise. And as she sat in the quiet, hands folded, heart still, she smiled. Because she realized something holy. The same Jesus who had once rescued her from a river, from lightning, from sickness, now walked her halls in the darkness and stood guard over her sleep. And she would never be afraid again. Not because danger would never come, but because she knew I never leave. And Mary's story kept unfolding. Because her life was not held together by locks or alarms, but by me. When Mary was 56, she still loved the quiet beauty of Ohio's countryside. Her hair had grown streaked with silver and her soul with wisdom. Life no longer rushed. It flowed. Her children had moved out, building families of their own, but she remained a steady anchor for them all. That day, she packed a basket with baked bread and jars of preserves, gifts for her daughter, who had just had her second child. The drive would take her across the hills and winding roads she knew by heart, including the old wooden bridge that arched over the slow-moving river at the edge of town. She didn't hesitate as she turned down the familiar gravel road. The trees bowed overhead, welcoming her passage, and birds scattered like confetti at the sound of her tires. She smiled, already imagining her grandchild's laughter, unaware that something beneath her wheels was not as it had always been. I saw what she could not, the hairline fractures deep in the bridge's foundation, weathered from years of harsh winters and overlooked repairs. It groaned beneath every passing vehicle, waiting for one final weight to break its spine. I knew the hour. I knew the minute. And I knew exactly when she would cross. As her car climbed onto the bridge, I walked beside her. The wood strained under the pressure, a silent cry in the grain that no one else could hear. Halfway across, a single beam beneath her buckled. It cracked, not loud enough to alarm her, but enough to shift the weight in warning. I moved quickly, holding the structure together with strength not seen by human eyes. Her tires rolled forward, inch by inch, over a surface that should have failed. But I would not let it fail. Not yet. The moment she reached the other side and turned onto solid ground, the bridge gave way. Behind her, with no weight left to bear, the center collapsed like a dying breath, its pieces crashing into the water below. Mary, hearing the noise, slammed the brakes and looked into her rearview mirror. What she saw made her heart stop. The bridge she had just crossed was gone. She stepped out of her car, trembling, her hand over her mouth. Dust and splinters rose in the air like smoke. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of how close she had come to the edge of eternity. She whispered, "Oh God," and I answered softly in her spirit, "I know. I carried you." Others would come later, police, construction crews, news reporters. They would call it a miracle, a lucky escape. The town would talk about how someone up there must have been watching her. And I smiled gently, as I always do when they try to name me with words too small for what I've done. Yes, I had been watching. But more than that, I had been holding, upholding, preserving what no beam could bear alone. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the stars. They had always fascinated her, distant, eternal, constant. And now they reminded her of me, of how small she was in the vastness of time, and yet how fiercely loved. She didn't need to understand why she had been spared. She only needed to remember that I had always been there. She opened her Bible that night, not out of habit, but out of hunger. The words came alive to her like fire on the page. "He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." She read it again and again, her lips moving, tears falling. For the first time, she believed it wasn't just poetry, it was personal. I had written it for her. In the years that followed, every time she crossed a bridge, any bridge, she would whisper a quiet prayer, not of fear, but of gratitude. Because deep down she knew that not all miracles are seen in the moment. Some are only understood when we look back and realize we walked safely across something that was never supposed to hold us. And Mary's story continued, because I still had more for her to do, more for her to love, more for her to become. The road ahead was not always smooth, but she never crossed alone. When Mary turned 68, her steps had slowed, but her faith had deepened. The farm was quieter now, her husband gone to rest a few years before, and her children grown, scattered across towns and cities. Yet in the silence of her home, she had discovered a new kind of closeness with me. Our conversations were no longer desperate cries in the night, but soft exchanges woven into her every day. She no longer needed proof of my presence. She carried it like breath. One cold November evening, as the wind howled against the windows and frost painted the glass, Mary felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. She had been sitting in her favorite chair, reading the Psalms aloud, when the pain struck, silent, invisible, yet heavy and terrifying. She pressed her hand against her heart and closed her eyes, unsure whether it was anxiety, age, or something far more serious. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not at first, but I knew. I saw what even she couldn't feel fully. Her heart was faltering. A silent heart attack was unfolding beneath the surface. She tried to stand, but her legs weakened beneath her. She slumped back into the chair, her Bible sliding to the floor. Her house was still, isolated in the countryside, far from neighbors, with no one nearby to notice the absence of her footsteps or the silence of her routine. Except for one companion, her dog, Samson, a golden retriever with a quiet loyalty and a spirit I had stirred more than once. That night, I stirred him again. Samson whined, barked, circled her feet. When she didn't respond, he began to bark louder, pawing at her knee, then running to the door and back again. He howled, a sound he had never made before, a sound meant to break the silence. And it did. A neighbor, passing by much later than usual, heard the unusual cries from the road and turned back, unsettled by the sound. He had never stopped at Mary's house before, but that night something tugged at his conscience. That something was me. He knocked, then pounded. When no answer came, he forced the door open, heart racing, unsure what he would find. He called her name. Samson barked again, leading him to the living room. And there she was, still breathing but fading fast. He called emergency services without hesitation. They arrived swiftly, not knowing they had stepped into a divine appointment. The paramedics worked quickly. One of them would later say, 2 more minutes, and we might have been too late. But they weren't too late, because I had called them in time. In the hospital, Mary woke to bright lights, machines, and the hum of quiet voices. She was groggy, confused, but alive. She turned her head slowly and whispered the only word she could think of, Jesus, and I answered, yes, I'm here. She would come to understand what had happened over the following days, the diagnosis, the danger, and the impossibly perfect timing. But in that first moment, she didn't need the details. She only knew she was still here. And I had not let her go. Her recovery was slow, but her heart grew stronger, not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual one. She looked at Samson differently now. She laughed through tears as she held his face in her hands, thanking me for using even her dog as an instrument of mercy. Every heartbeat she felt from that day forward was a reminder. He kept me. And so Mary began to speak again, not only of my presence in her youth or my deliverance in fire and lightning, but of my nearness in stillness, in fragile hearts, and even in barking dogs. She understood now more than ever that my protection wasn't always dramatic. It was often quiet, woven into the fabric of the ordinary. And it was constant, because her story still wasn't over, and every beat of her heart from that night forward would carry the rhythm of grace. When Mary was 91, time had shaped her into something quietly extraordinary. Her hands had grown thin, her steps slower, but her soul was more alive than ever. She no longer rushed through her days. Each sunrise was a gift, each prayer a conversation. Her voice, though softer, carried weight, not because of its volume, but because of the years it had traveled through. That winter the snow came early to Ohio, blanketing the countryside in silence. She had promised her youngest grandson she would come visit him, even if just for an hour. She was never one to break a promise. The forecast warned of a storm, but Mary had lived through many winters. She packed a small bag, warmed the car, and made her way onto the quiet road that led through the hills. The snow had already begun to fall when she turned onto the stretch of highway that cut through the woods. She thought she had enough time. She thought it was just another snow, but I knew what was ahead, something no radar had yet detected, something that would turn her journey into a near-final chapter. The wind picked up sharply. Flakes thickened into sheets, and the world outside her windshield turned white. Her tires began to slip. Visibility vanished. Panic crept into her chest as she realized she could no longer see the road, the trees, or the edge of anything. She pulled over, heart pounding, the warmth in the car fading fast. The heater sputtered, the phone in her coat had no signal, and she was alone. Or so it seemed. But I was already there. I had seen this storm before the foundations of the world were laid. I had counted this very hour and written my hand into its center. As Mary shivered in the driver's seat, trying to stay awake, her lips moved in prayer. She didn't ask to be rescued. She only asked that I stay close. That was enough for her, and I did. I was closer than the cold, closer than her heartbeat. I surrounded her with my presence while the snow rose outside the doors. I stirred the heart of a man miles away, a snowplow driver who wasn't scheduled to work that evening. He'd already parked for the night, but something within him wouldn't let him rest. He felt the urge to drive one more route, a stretch he rarely covered. He didn't know why, but I did. He climbed into the truck and started the engine, unaware that he was heading toward a divine assignment. An hour passed, then another. Mary had begun to fade, the weight of sleep tugging at her, the cold pressing in. Her body was weak, but her spirit stayed awake. "Jesus," she whispered faintly. And then, distant at first, she heard the sound of tires crunching ice. Lights broke through the blizzard. The snowplow slowed, then stopped beside her car. The driver rushed out, opened the door, and found her barely conscious, curled in her coat with frozen fingers clutching a small Bible. They wrapped her in blankets, rushed her to warmth, and called for medical care. The doctors said it had been close, too close. Minutes later, and her body might not have come back, but it had. Because I had written this rescue into time long before Mary ever stepped into that storm. She rested in the hospital, skin warming, strength slowly returning. The first thing she asked for was her Bible. The second was a pencil. She wanted to write the date on a blank page near the back, a new place of remembrance, a new altar of gratitude. She didn't care what the world called it. Coincidence, good timing, survival. She knew better. She called it deliverance. She called it me. In the days that followed, she told the story over and over, not to bring attention to herself, but to remind others that Jesus still shows up in storms, that even in old age, even in blizzards, even in silence and near frost, he sees, he moves, he saves. And I smiled every time she spoke, because her voice had become a living testimony. And Mary's journey pressed on, not because of luck or strength or chance, but because I still had more for her to live, more love for her to give, and more of my glory to show through her fragile but faithful life. When Mary reached 117 years of life, the world called her a wonder, Her name had appeared in newspapers, spoken with reverence in churches and nursing homes, marveled over by those who could not grasp how someone so gentle could endure so long. But I had known all along. I had counted every one of her days before the earth ever spun, and I knew that her last one had now arrived, not in tragedy, not in fear, but in my perfect peace. This would not be a story of a death she escaped. This would be a story of the day I came to carry her home. She lay in her bed, surrounded by the hum of quiet machines and the soft rhythm of breath. Her body, so faithful for more than a century, had grown still. Every wrinkle on her face held a memory, every scar a victory, every heartbeat a testament of my mercy. Nurses passed quietly through the room, and family came in shifts, whispering prayers and singing hymns she used to sing when her voice was stronger. And all the while I stood beside her, just as I had always done. Mary didn't fear this moment. She had seen me too many times to doubt me now. She had spoken of me as one speaks of a lifelong friend, because I had been exactly that. I had walked with her through fires, floods, near-death diagnoses, grief, storms and loneliness, and now I was walking her through the veil. She couldn't see the light rising in the room, but her spirit already sensed it. She was letting go, gently, willingly, like someone who had finished her work and knew the arms waiting on the other side. Her last words weren't grand. She didn't try to impress anyone. She whispered, "My name one more time. Jesus." That was enough. I had waited her whole life for that final breath, not because I needed it, but because it would be the moment she came fully into my arms. And when it came, it was like the closing of a book whose final page turned not with sorrow, but with joy. Her heart stopped, but her spirit rose, and I caught her. What no one else in the room could see was the celebration that erupted in heaven. Angels stood in rows. The ones who had followed her life from its first breath wept with joy. Trumpets did not sound on earth, but they sounded here. I reached out my hand to her, young again, radiant, whole, and she laughed. Not the quiet laugh of age, but the full, ringing laughter of someone completely free. She had come home. I walked with her through the gates she had believed in her whole life. Every step she took in eternity was on streets I had prepared for her. She looked around, overwhelmed by the colors, the light, the love, and then she looked at me. She had seen glimpses of my face in every miracle I'd done for her, but now, face to face, she saw me clearly, and I saw her, my beloved Mary, my faithful one, the one I had kept. And I told her what I'd waited so long to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You finished your race." She bowed her head not in fear, but in worship. Because here in my kingdom there is no more pain, no more death, no more separation. Just me and her together forever. Back on earth, her family wept. But even in their tears, there was peace, because Mary's life had not been one of random luck or survival. It had been a tapestry of divine deliverance. I had carried her every step of the way, and now I had carried her home. They would speak of her story for generations, but I would hold her in eternity, and her story continues even here, for in my kingdom no story ends. What began with a river, a bolt of lightning, a misdiagnosis, a storm, and 1,000 quiet prayers, has now become part of the eternal song of the redeemed. Mary did not die early. She did not die late. She died on the very day I had written in my book. And now she lives forever in my arms. I am Jesus Christ, and I was with Mary every moment of her life. From her very first breath to her final one, I watched over her, protected her, walked with her, and carried her when she could no longer walk on her own. Every danger she escaped, every storm she survived, every tear she cried, I was there. I was never far. She did not die by accident, nor by the hand of chance. Mary left the earth on the exact day, month, and year that I had written before time began. No sooner, no later. Because her life was mine, and her death was not the end, but the beginning of forever. And now she lives, not in shadow or sorrow, but in the fullness of joy. She rests in my presence, whole and radiant, embraced in my arms for all eternity. Her story is not over. It has only just begun, here with me in the glory of everlasting life. Once I've taken care of my beloved daughter, I now need you to subscribe to this channel so you can receive the necessary care in your lives. Enjoy and leave a comment about Mary's life and my deliverances.